5 times. 5 separate occasions where Keir Starmer violated centuries-old royal protocol. 5 moments that left palace officials furious, constitutional experts shocked, and King Charles reportedly baffled and uncomfortable. And the most outrageous part? He faced 0 consequences. No apology, no punishment, no political price paid. He just got away with it. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a prime minister who once wanted to abolish the monarchy now breaks its rules with impunity, and why his disrespect for royal protocol reveals his complete contempt for the institution he pretends to serve. These aren't minor etiquette mistakes. These are deliberate violations that would have ended careers in any previous era. Let's count them down. The scandal. Starmer publicly presented King Charles's handwritten letter inviting Trump to a state visit, turning royal correspondence into a political prop. February 2025. Oval Office. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer presented President Trump with a letter from King Charles III that contained an unprecedented invitation for a second state visit. State visits are royal prerogatives. The protocol is sacred. Government advises privately, monarch decides privately. Invitation is extended through diplomatic channels privately. The key word? Private. Starmer violated this completely. He turned the king's letter into a public spectacle, holding it up for cameras, making Trump read it aloud, using it as proof of his own diplomatic success. King Charles was reportedly baffled by how Starmer handled this. Palace sources told royal correspondents that this was not how these things are done. The letter should have been delivered through proper channels, not performed as political theater. Starmer turned the king into a prop. He used royal authority to boost his own image without respecting the constitutional separation between crown and politics. He made what should have been a quiet diplomatic gesture into a global media event that embarrassed the palace. The consequence? None. 0. Starmer got his headlines, Trump got his invitation, and the palace stayed silent because constitutional monarchs cannot publicly criticize their prime ministers. Starmer forced King Charles to read 30-plus pieces of radical legislation at state opening, making the monarch uncomfortable and violating the spirit of constitutional monarchy. King Charles was left uncomfortable by the plans proposed by Starmer, with the new PM drafting over 30 new legislations for his incoming Labour government. 30 bills. That's not just ambitious, it's unprecedented and constitutionally reckless. State opening is when the king reads the government's legislative agenda. By convention, this should be reasonable in scope, carefully considered, and avoid forcing the monarch to endorse controversial policies he might personally oppose. Starmer ignored all of that. He dumped an avalanche of radical legislation on the king, forcing Charles to spend hours reading proposals that made him deeply uncomfortable, including constitutional reforms that threaten the very institutions Charles represents. You really have to think about these things carefully. But Starmer didn't care. He wanted his 30 bills, and if that meant making the king uncomfortable, so be it. The state opening speech should maintain the fiction that the king governs. By forcing Charles to read so much controversial material, Starmer exposed the king's lack of real power and turned him into an obvious puppet reading government-written words. The consequence? Again, nothing. Palace sources leaked their discomfort, but Starmer faced no political backlash. He got his legislative agenda announced with full royal pageantry, regardless of how uncomfortable it made the king. Starmer created situations where King Charles's views conflicted with government policy, forcing the king into politically compromised positions. Multiple instances where Starmer's policies directly contradicted known royal preferences, forcing Charles to either stay silent, implying agreement, or risk violating his own political neutrality. The king finds himself in a constitutionally awkward position as he serves both the United Kingdom and Canada. Starmer's handling of UK-Canada relations amid Trump's annexation threats put Charles in an impossible position. As King of Canada, he should defend Canadian sovereignty. As King of UK, he must support his British Prime Minister's foreign policy. Starmer created this constitutional nightmare through careless diplomacy.
Starmer's positions on Commonwealth reparations for slavery put Charles in a difficult spot during the Samoa Summit. The king had to navigate demands for $18 trillion in reparations, while his government took positions that might alienate Commonwealth nations. Starmer wanted King Charles at COP 29 for political cover, despite Charles's private concerns about being used for costly initiatives. The protocol is that the king doesn't refuse government advice, so Starmer can essentially force Charles into politically compromised situations. A prime minister should protect the monarch from political controversy, not create it. Starmer repeatedly puts Charles in positions where any action or inaction becomes politically interpreted. The consequence? Once more, nothing. Starmer continues making policy without considering its impact on the king's constitutional position.
Starmer went against King Charles's wishes in publicly delivering an invitation, violating the private nature of Crown government consultation. What happened? Starmer went against the wishes of King Charles in publicly delivering an invitation of a state visit to Donald Trump. The protocol for state visits involves private consultation between government and palace. The government advises, the monarch decides, then, only then, is anything made public through proper diplomatic announcements. Starmer skipped all of that. He publicly announced the state visit invitation before palace protocols were followed, essentially boxing Charles into a decision Starmer had already made public. This violated the fundamental principle of crown government relations. The monarch must be consulted privately before decisions are announced publicly. The famous phrase is, the right to be consulted, the right to encourage, the right to warn. Starmer denied Charles all three by going public first. Palace insiders were reportedly furious. One source told GB News the king was baffled that Starmer would violate protocol so blatantly. But again, what could Charles do? Publicly contradicting his prime minister would be even more constitutionally damaging than Starmer's original violation. Why it matters? This sets a dangerous precedent. If prime ministers can announce royal decisions before consulting the palace, the monarchy becomes a rubber stamp with no meaningful role in government. The consequence? You guessed it, nothing. Starmer got his headline, Trump got his invitation, and the protocol violation was buried in palace sources say articles that most people never read. The scandal? Starmer deliberately uses King Charles and royal events for political legitimacy while privately opposing the institution he's exploiting. This is the meta violation that encompasses all others. Following a torrid week that left his leadership under mounting pressure, Starmer joined King Charles at church in Scotland. This wasn't about faith. This wasn't about respect. This was calculated political rescue. Starmer's deputy had just resigned. His government was in chaos. His approval ratings were catastrophic. He needed to be photographed with the one British institution that still commands respect, the monarchy. You're not supposed to use the crown for partisan political benefit. The monarchy lends legitimacy to government as an institution, not to specific politicians trying to save their careers. But Starmer has made this his pattern. Appears with King Charles when politically weak, uses royal events as legitimacy props, wraps himself in Union Jacks and monarchy imagery, all while having spent years proposing to abolish the very institution he's exploiting. A man who often used to propose the abolition of the monarchy now cannot survive politically without that monarchy's borrowed legitimacy. This isn't just protocol violation, it's constitutional fraud. Starmer is using an institution he doesn't respect, while that institution cannot refuse to be used because of constitutional duty to support whatever government voters elect. Not only has Starmer faced no consequences, he's succeeded. His strategic use of royal imagery has helped rebrand Labour as patriotic. His appearances with King Charles provide cover for his terrible approval ratings. The violation works, so he keeps doing it.
So why has Starmer faced zero consequences for these 5 major protocol violations? 3 reasons. King Charles cannot publicly criticize his prime minister. The most he can do is leak concerns through palace sources, which mainstream media largely ignores. Most British media doesn't understand or care about royal protocol. They see state visits and ceremonies as pageantry, not constitutional structures that have rules.